Hey, Todd, you and I were introduced by a mutual colleague and hit it off really quickly on two things, this idea of transparency or being buyer centric, buyer first. And then the second and more interesting was this idea of back to the future. And I sort of dated as, hey, this lost decade of sales, the 2010s, where we got into the challenger mode. And you said, no, Brent, 100 years ago, people were talking about buyer first or transparency. Would love for you to just share with our audience why this really is a very, very old concept.
Yeah, I mean, when cool people are doing cool things on the weekends, you'll find me reading books from the 1800s and early 1900s on sales and sales leadership. And I mean, that makes me like a nerd of the highest order. But, you know, really what struck me, though, was this idea that, in the early 1900s, sales was a trusted, respected, and even admired profession, to the point where, the president of the United States at the time in 1916, Woodrow Wilson, was keynoting a sales conference during the middle of a world war. Like, why does that happen? Why was sales being taught at every university? And even at the high school level, they were teaching sales, and that all went away, right? Respect, admiration, education, poof, gone. And so much of it has to do with this idea of what was the original design of the sales profession in the modern sense. Modern meaning we, as organizations during the progressive era of the Industrial Revolution, we hired our own sales reps versus having manufacturers reps. We trained them, we gave them variable comp, we gave them guaranteed territories. That was what I'd call modern selling, started in the 1890s. But what was the design? There's a few quotes that I'll rattle off. I'll nerd out
Please.
on, right? So, I mean, the first quote comes from who I believe is the GOAT of sales philosophers, and it's a guy named Arthur Sheldon. And he wrote a book in 1911 called The Art of Selling. But he's got a quote that was really the basis and foundation for what sales was supposed to be back then. And the quote was, "True salesmanship is the science of service. Grasp that thought firmly and never let go." Right? So sales was supposed to be a service profession where our role, and as exacerbated by Woodrow Wilson during the World Sales Congress in 1916, was to sell the right solutions to the right companies at the right time, at the right price. Because when we do right by our customers, all ships rise, and anybody who's living in that economy flourishes as a result of salespeople doing things the right way. Now, what does that mean? Well, that means honesty. That means truth. I mean, I've found chapters dedicated to honesty in sales dating all the way back to 1726, right? Like the foundation was sales as a service, and we need to be honest. One of my favorite sales quotes of all time is from 1919. It's an author named Arthur Dunn. Scientific Selling and Advertising was his book. But the quote was, "If the truth won't sell it, don't sell it." Right? I love that quote. And it was all about buyer centrism there. And, there's so many, I'm sure you've got questions, but there's so many things that we did along the journey to lose our face to the customers. Back then, sales was about face-to-face. You had to do it. There's no telephones, there's no email. It had to be done face-to-face. So we developed relationships, and we actually cared about our customers. The rise of the telephone, which really became an outreach and sales tool starting in the 1910s. You'll see that the rise of sales tech, along with it, the degradation of the profession and that admiration went along with it. There's a number of things that happened along the way, but I think it goes back to buyer centrism and losing our face to the customer and being just so enamored by technology and scale that we forgot that there's a human being that we're supposed to be establishing a relationship with.
Yeah, it's fascinating to think that at its heart, like modern selling was service oriented, and also this idea of it being a trusted advisor, right? It was first about building trust and doing right by your customers. And you started to answer one of the other questions I was going to ask you, which is, so how did this start to erode? And one of the answers, I think, is technology. And And it's creating that, disrupting that personalization. And I've given a talk where I say, look, in 2009, 56% of sellers were on quota. And by 2019, that dropped to about 42%. And now it's come back up, but it's still less than 0.5%. Meanwhile, in the same time period, the amount of investment in technology has tripled. And the expectation for, so there's, I think I don't know if there's other stats on that, a direct relationship between creating distance and hurting performance.
Yeah, I mean, I always joke. I've got a keynote that I give that's called "Salespeople Ruin Everything," and it's based on that idea, right? That the telephone, when you really think about it, what a gift to the sales profession, right? That I can reach more people and hopefully let those more people achieve better, faster outcomes because I can get to more of them and deliver that message without even leaving my house. Like, how great! And what do? We ruined it. With spam calls and generic, like pounding people to the point where we needed technologies created to prevent salespeople from doing it through caller ID, which was first designed by Dr. Shirley Jackson in the 1970s. That didn't work. We needed a do not call registry established, which by the end of 2021 had 221 million phone numbers on it. Salespeople ruined it, right? Alexander Graham Bell would be rolling over in his grave if he knew that, like, what did you do to my gift? And like, we did the same thing with email. Ray Tomlinson sends the first email in 1971. And, now we've got spam filters and spam catchers, and that didn't work. The government had to get involved again and create the Canned Spam Act of 2003. We keep doing this over and over again, that we see, like, you get blinded by scale instead of realizing that our role is to, again, as Arthur Sheldon said, to be a service, to grasp that thought firmly and never let go. And I think technology caused us to let go. And I think there's an opportunity to get it back. I mean, that's a start, but there's certainly some other things that we can be doing that we've kind of lost our path along the way.
Well, let's drill into that. And your first book, Transparency Sale, award-winning book. You've just come out with a second book on the transparent sales leader, which gives a set of rules and principles, which I'd love for you to talk through about how you do things right. So let's talk about how you do things right, and then let's talk about why it's so hard, because I don't think it's just technology.
Well, yeah, I mean, it goes back to buyer centrism again, right? With the new book, I was in full nerdy form, and there's a lot of history that I injected into that. But let's go back for a minute. So there's a movie that everybody, like, when you watch it, you want to cry yourself to sleep on sales. It was Glengarry Glen Ross back in 1992, and Alec Baldwin playing Blake from Mitch and Murray comes in and gives this berating talk to the sales team, right? And he's got a chalkboard that's got like ABC, always be closing. And then he's got something on it called AIDA. He got that part right. And here's what I mean. Back in 1898, there was a guy named Elias St. Elmo Lewis who theorized that every buyer, their brain, their being goes through 4 stages on their path to making a purchase. It was AIDA, right? It was, are they paying attention? Do we have their attention? Are they interested? So that's the I. Have we created a desire? So that they have a desire for this product. And then the A is, are they ready to take action? So that was AIDA. What's amazing is that became the basis for every sales process and sales forecasting methodology through at least the 1940s. What's unique about it, though, is it's about recognizing buyer behavior. It's got, like, AIDA has got nothing to do with this, what the seller's doing. It's about creating processes and the little endorphin spikes that we get as we're moving a customer along the journey based on recognizing what the buyer's doing, not today's world, which really started with Siebel in 1993 and Salesforce in 99 and HubSpot, right out of the box. The stages and every sales process is based on what sellers are doing, right? Discovery, qualification, demo, proposal, negotiation, close. No wonder we can't forecast, but no wonder we get so self-centered on what we're doing and we lose sight of what the buyer is doing. And I think that's a huge opportunity that not only creates a potential differentiator for you as a sales professional and a sales organization, to become seller or buyer centric again by rethinking your process and even your stages. But it was something that we did when I was chief revenue officer of Power Reviews in my last company, where we overlaid buyer centrism over our stages, and our forecasting became almost instantly more accurate, right? Like all of a sudden, we're able to predict when a buyer's going to buy because we're actually focusing on what the buyer's doing. Who knew that that would be more accurate than the other? So I think that's one thing that I dive into pretty deeply in the new book, but that's why it's so hard. We've systemically created seller centrism in our processes and our forecasting, and you can't help but forget about the buyer when everything that you're paid to do and measured on, and every endorphin rush is based on what you're doing.
Right. So I love that the focus on the AIDA. We often say, sellers can't close deals. Buyers close deals. All you can do as a seller is guide them to the right next action.
Yeah.
To your point, like that overlay matters so much. And so we've got the technology. Training often has focused on the seller actions or the pitch, right? As opposed to the good discovery. I wonder, one of the really interesting things about your first book is this idea that, look, as buyers, our brain is not wired to be pitched to. Once we're pitched to, our defenses go up and we're kind of losing ground.
Yeah.
What is mindset part of the issue, right?
Well,
Is a buyer-centric mindset. I mean, our brains are kind of wired to be selfish, and our brains are kind of wired to start with a conclusion and then find data to support that conclusion.
right. Yeah. Yeah.
So in some ways, our brains are wired to pitch. They're not really wired to discovery.
Yeah.
I don't know how that fits into your framework.
It fits in perfectly. I mean, that's it. I think, the one thing that I talk about a lot is this idea that, the mindset has to start with, again, sales is the science of service, but our role, buyers don't buy when they're convinced. Like if they do, they're probably pissed about it 20 minutes later. Buyers buy when they can predict. And our role is to help the buyer predict, to share both the pros and cons and help them to predict what their experience would be like if they decided to go with any solution, and then more specifically with your solution, and what that looks like, the pros and the cons, right? And I believe that that's our role, to help them get to that decision as quickly as possible. Win fast, lose fast. And really, the first book, The Transparency Sale, was born of what you just talked about. It was born as, my last role as CRO of a reviews technology company. We were providing our solutions to retailers and brands. So Crocs, Vineyard Vine, Jet, like all those companies, they were using our tech to collect and display ratings and reviews on their website. What had happened was that we had done a research study with Northwestern University that just looked at consumer behavior around this idea of, all right, when a website's acting as a salesperson, what do human beings do? All right, so turns out we all read reviews. Cool, no surprise there. But the two data points that literally changed my life, like I quit my job and wrote a book like a lunatic, is that 85% of us read the negative reviews first. Again, when a website's acting as a salesperson and we're on our own, we read the 4s, 3s, 2s, and 1s before we read the 5s. And a product that has negative reviews, as a matter of fact, a product that's got an average review score between a 4.2 and a 4.5, that's optimal for purchase conversion, meaning a product that's got negative reviews right under it. I bought it, I hated it. That product sells better than a product that's got nothing but perfect 5-star reviews. As a matter of fact, a product with nothing but 5-star reviews sells at about the same rate as a product that has an average review score of around a 3.25, which is not very good. I looked at that and thought, all right, that's when a website's acting as a salesperson. What happens when a human being is acting as a salesperson? Like, does that same scenario work? And is that the way we're triggered as buyers? And the answer was emphatically yes. we need the negative first to be able to process the positive. Until we get it, we feel like we're being convinced instead of helping to predict, because we know inherently that perfection doesn't exist. And subconsciously, we can't even fathom what you're talking about if you're trying to convince me without the negative and the risk. And that led to us theorizing that, hey, if we could present our solutions as a 4.2 to 4.5 and actually lead with something that maybe we give up that a competitor does better, or something that a customer like yours might want that we don't do great, or we've got a high price, or when you do a Google search, you're going to find that some customers had bad experiences. When we led with that, trust grew, sales cycles sped up, win rates went up, we qualified in faster, we qualified out a lot faster. If you're going to lose fast. And we made it really, really difficult on our competitors to message against us because we had already shared the negative, right? And all of a sudden we're differentiating the way we sell, and we became Chicago's fastest growing tech company from 2014 to 2017. And I was like, I got to get these ideas out there. And that kind of led to the book. But that's buyer centrism, but it also sells better too. And the proliferation of reviews and feedback on everything we do, buy, and experience now means you got to do it anyway, right? Like I said, honesty has always been important. It's a requirement now. And that's what transparency is about.
Yeah, I mean, it's in that one concept, there's honesty, trust, buyer centricity, right? You focus on the other first, and going back to this concept of service, and that actually builds deeper engagement.
Exactly. That's exactly it. Right. I mean, because even if you lose fast, what happens? Well, in many cases, you've built trust, and now you've got time to actually go after opportunities that are a better fit, A. But B, I mean, the number of times, even in my own business today, where I get an inbound and somebody's like, hey, Todd, we need top of funnel prospecting help. I'm like, cool. Like, tell me about it. What are you trying to achieve? That's great. There's about 50 people that do that. I can do it, but on the list, like the ranking of the top 50, I'd come in at about number 47. Now, maybe you're cool with that, but I doubt it. Let me recommend a couple of people that are at the top 3 on that, and like connect with them, because I think they're going to help you achieve that outcome a lot better than I could. More often than not, I mean, that's transparency, that builds trust, that's confidence, which is contagious. But more often than not, it's come right back around to, wait, what is it you do? Like, tell me more about what you're doing, like where your focus is. Like, all right, well, this is what I do, and how I do it and what I try to help companies do. And if it's not a fit for them, they're finding another organ or part of their org that it is, or they're referring me to other people, or in many cases, they're going, gosh, we need that too. And it's all founded in trust. So.
Awesome. It's awesome stuff. I wonder if you could now, connect us to, we've talked a little bit about the first book and the foundational concepts, as you think about being buyer centric and focusing on buyer actions and building trust and making confidence in your offering, making that contagious. What is the role of management? What are kind of the essential ingredients of the transparent manager to make this a more consistent team behavior?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's so many things systemically that we've created that actually prevent us from being transparent sellers. And so much of it comes from leadership, right? And so, we can talk a little bit about like the structure of the book in a minute, but I mean, there's just some things that, gosh, you maybe aren't even realizing that we're doing just because of the telephone game of sales leadership. And what I mean by that is, like, I know when I first got promoted to be a leader, what was my methodology or my approach? Well, I had a couple managers that I really liked. I'll do more of what they told, like they did. I had a couple I didn't like. I'm not going to do what they did, but there's some foundational stuff, like, creating environments where every rep at all times, you got to have 4x your quota and pipeline. Like like pipeline low, because you're only going to close 20, and they measure to that. Well, what that creates is a desire to lose slowly and to fill your pipeline with 4x filled with crap. Like, why don't we take a step back and go, why is it 4x? Why can't it be 2x? Why can't we qualify out of these 75% that aren't going to close faster? So we're spending our time more on, and get that down to 2x. There's things like the word commit, where you've got reps that you've required to commit to deals or commit to a dollar amount. That's like a breeding ground for lies and a lack of transparency. And as a result, your reps lie through their forecasts. So you end up with an inaccurate forecast. When deals go south, you as the leader become the last person they go to instead of the first one, because they know you got outsold is coming, right? Like there's systemic things throughout the process that we've just done because that was the way that we grew up in sales that are actually driving a lack of buyer centrism and a real seller centrism and I'm trying to protect myself and my job versus I'm trying to help more buyers achieve better outcomes. So, I mean, those are just a couple of the things that I explore in the new book. But yeah, I mean, it starts there.
Starts with the language and the expectations.
Right.
How do you think about building, so I guess it's partly process, but how do we get people to think first about, focus first on service, focus first on always be helping, as opposed to focus first on, what does this do for my quota? What does it do for my pipeline? Right. It's like a more, we know other centricity works, but there's a little bit of disbelief in that.
Yeah. I mean, I just wrote an article on the rise of the chief revenue officer, right? That role that like 10 years ago, nobody had ever heard of. And now every company's got it and the why behind that. And I really believe that the rise of the CRO has to do almost directly with the rise of the as a service economy, meaning that like, I mean, I don't know how old you are, but like when I grew up in sales, we were selling perpetual software licenses, for example, where you spent a big dollar amount on a piece of technology. It showed up on your front step in a big set of reels. You had to implement it. You paid a perpetual license, and then you paid maintenance if you wanted support and upgrades. The deal was the peak. It was the mountaintop. In today's environment, your profitability doesn't come in year one. It's an as a service environment, meaning if they don't stay, if they don't buy more, if they don't renew, and they're not advocating for you, you're not surviving, right? And so if the truth won't sell it, don't sell it becomes a pervasive philosophy that every company needs to have, because if they're buying and they're canceling after year one and then ripping you to all their peers, you're screwed. So we've got to look systemically at the processes and just make sure that, obviously the idea of overpromise and underdeliver, bad idea, always has been a bad idea, doesn't matter. But I believe that the most successful companies in the world are the ones that are best at setting proper expectations and consistently meeting them. Those are the ones, and even the under-promise, over-deliver doesn't work in the long term because it creates an expectation inflation. It's a form of lying. Like new expectations are set because if you're consistently setting under expectations and then over-performing on it, I start to view you as kind of lying. And I inflate everything that you say to me. Now, that's why I think that we got to really embrace this idea that the most successful companies in the world are experts at setting proper expectations, winning fast, losing fast, and doing it through transparency, right? It has to happen today. Otherwise, I think companies aren't going to make it, and they're already feeling that.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting, the rise of the subscription economy. It started in software.
Yeah.
As you allude to, but then people rent their clothes and
it's product as a service. Yeah.
Subscriptions to meals, and you rent your bike rather than
booze.
owning a bike, right? So the world has gone to this, that puts the relationship at the center.
Exactly. It has to.
It has to.
I mean, it's funny that that became an issue back in the 1920s. It's really interesting. Like I was reading a study from 1926 that 90% of corporations had advertising rolling into sales because there was a need to make sure that the language that was coming out of the corporation, whether it be ads or the salesperson, was consistent. And we had to view that across the whole life cycle. We somehow lost that. because it then became, really doesn't matter if we create bad experiences. You already got your money, and it's very hard for you to share that you had a bad experience. Like, write a letter. What are you going to do? That's all changed today. That this rise of the proliferation of sharing and feedback means we got to get it right. And that happens from the first touch. Your brand to that customer is being established for the first time when they get a cold call from one of your reps, a voicemail, when they see an ad, when they get a brochure, whatever, all the way to their 7th renewal. And that's why I think we've needed to have really focused oversight. And that was really what I believe caused the rise of the chief revenue officer role. And again, I believe that CRO is an important role from a buyer centricity perspective.
Yeah, well, it's so buyers today are a lot. I mean, they were never linear, but they're not at all linear now. I mean, to your point, it might be a cold call, it might be website visit, it might be a download, might be a brochure at an event. So it's fascinating. I hadn't heard that, and it makes sense. Like, if you just sold software, that ongoing messaging and engagement wasn't as important as it is today, where the continuity of the buyer and customer experience is key to keep them and fully monetize them, but then the reference base.
Exactly.
Right. So that's fascinating. The CRO. So when you're to manage in a transparent way, you have to have kind of a steward of consistent messaging across all buyer and customer touch points.
Yeah, I believe, so when I first got promoted to be a CRO, right? I mean, there still was the silos. We had marketing, we had sales, we had customer success, and then you had business development over here too. And it was 4 different piles reporting to the CEO, who also had product and engineering and finance and fundraising and all that stuff to deal with. The CRO role, it's got to be somebody who wakes up every day thinking about that entire customer life cycle, and that's all they focus on. How do we remove friction from that journey? How do we embrace necessary friction? And how do we create consistent expectations that we consistently meet? That's their role, and it's never been more important.
Todd, this has been an awesome conversation. I appreciate you spending the time. I learned a ton, and I learned a ton about things I didn't expect to learn about.
Yeah, I mean, I think you and I could talk for hours, and you've only scratched the surface on my nerdery, but this has been a lot of fun.
Thanks for your time.
Thanks for having me.